The snow had already begun to fall again when Elsa Anderson found her usual corner outside the T-Centralen station. Her coat, once navy blue, was now dulled by salt and wear. She curled her fingers under her arms, trying to trap the last bit of warmth. People passed by quickly, avoiding eye contact, faces hidden behind scarves and indifference. Stockholm, beautiful and cold in equal measure, held no kindness for the forgotten. Elsa had once lived just 5 metro stops away, in a tidy flat in Södermalm with her mother and stepfather. Now, her world was a sleeping bag, a battered thermos, and a few coins rattling in a coffee cup she found in a bin 2 months ago. A boy, no older than 10, tugged at his mother's hand as they passed. "Mama, why is she sitting there?" The woman didn't answer. She only pulled her son closer and walked faster. Elsa gave a faint smile. At least the boy noticed her. That was something. It had been almost a year since she was forced out. Forced not because of drugs, not because of crime, not even because of debt.
People always assume those things. But no.
Elsa's homelessness was far more silent and cruel. Back then, she had just turned 21. She was studying literature at Stockholm University, part-time, while working as a barista near Hoderget. She loved books, especially old Swedish novels. And poetry. Always poetry. She used to carry a notebook filled with verses she never dared to share. That all changed the day her mother married Magnus Sjöberg. Magnus was polite in public, strict at home, and entirely uninterested in Elsa's existence. He had 2 sons from a previous marriage, both already moved out, both just as cold as he was. Elsa could feel the walls closing in from the day he moved in. He was civil. Until he wasn't. It started with silence. Then suggestions. Then accusations. He told her mother that Elsa was lazy, that she was wasting money, that she was a burden. And slowly, her mother began to believe it. Or perhaps she always had. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where Elsa dared to argue about taking a second job, her mother stood in the kitchen with a folded piece of paper. It was a list. A list of flats in distant suburbs. Places Elsa could afford if she tried harder. Her mother didn't yell. She didn't even cry. She just said, "It's time you stood on your own." Elsa left that night. She stayed with a friend for a few weeks. Then another. But friends have limits, and Stockholm has rules. Without a steady income, no one would rent to her. Without an address, she couldn't get state assistance. Within 3 months, she had no home at all. That winter was the worst in a decade. Elsa found refuge in libraries during the day and tried shelters at night, though most were always full. The waiting lists were endless, and the rules even more so. She learned quickly how to keep safe, how to sleep with one eye open, and how to stay invisible when needed. But one day, she saw her mother. It was on Drottninggatan. Her mother walked out of a boutique, smiling, arm in arm with Magnus. Elsa froze. She thought of running up to her. But something about their warmth, their laughter, it was like seeing strangers. She turned away before they noticed. Now, as the snow fell thicker and her fingers began to ache, Elsa stared up at the gray sky and whispered to no one, "They don't see me anymore." But someone had seen her. A woman in a dark green coat had been watching from across the street. Her name was Alva Lindgren, and she would become the first thread in a story Elsa never expected to unravel. Waiting, watching, and preparing to intervene. Alva Lindgren was not the kind of woman who normally stopped to stare. She was a civil servant at the Socialförvaltningen, Stockholm's social welfare office. Her days were filled with paperwork, policy meetings, and quiet lunches at her desk. She wore the same shade of lipstick every day, carried the same leather handbag, and lived alone in a modest flat in Visastan with her rescue cat, Tyra. But that day, something about Elsa Anderson caught her attention. She had passed the young woman outside T-Centralen several times over the last month. There was nothing especially loud or dramatic about her presence. In fact, that was what struck Alva most, how quiet she was. She never shouted, never begged. She simply sat, eyes far off, as if part of a different world. It reminded Alva of someone. Her younger sister, Ellen, who had disappeared in 1997 and was later found in a shelter in Uppsala, her mind frayed by untreated illness and years of silence. Ellen had never come home. That memory made Alva pause. The next morning, she passed the same corner and saw Elsa again. The snow had melted into a dirty slush, soaking through the girl's blanket. Her fingers were red and raw. Alva kept walking at first, but then, 2 blocks later, she stopped. She turned back. Elsa noticed her this time. Their eyes met briefly. Alva gave a nod, not quite a smile, then entered the Pressburn kiosk nearby and bought 2 black coffees. She walked back over and handed one to Elsa without a word. Elsa hesitated, then accepted it. "Thanks," she said softly. Alva crouched down slightly, not enough to draw attention, but just enough to be level with her. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" Elsa looked away. "I'll figure it out." Alva didn't push. "I work with housing services. I might be able to help." "I'm fine," Elsa said quickly. "Really?" The tone was defensive, but not aggressive. More like someone used to disappointment. Alva nodded again. "All right. Just if you change your mind, I'm here most days around this time." Elsa said nothing more, and Alva walked off. That night, Elsa sat on her usual bench under the flickering metro sign and thought about the woman with the kind eyes. She had long stopped trusting officials. There were too many forms, too many conditions. They always asked for addresses she didn't have, phone numbers she couldn't afford, documents she'd long lost. Still, something about Alva lingered. Elsewhere, Alva sat by her window, a notebook in her lap. She jotted down details: Elsa's name, approximate age, location. She wasn't supposed to track people without their consent, but she justified it by calling it early observation. She made some calls the next morning. A shelter in Södermalm had a single bed left, but only if the woman came in by 6 that evening. No exceptions. Alva returned to the corner just before 5, only to find the bench empty. Elsa had vanished. The wind picked up. Alva waited for 15 minutes, her coffee cooling in her hands. Then, just as she was about to give up, she saw Elsa reappear, carrying a small paper bag and rubbing her hands together for warmth. Alva stood up. "There's a place for you tonight. One night only. You'd have to come now." Elsa blinked. "Why are you helping me?" "I don't know," Alva admitted. "But I can't stop thinking about you sitting here." There was a long pause. Then, Elsa whispered, "Okay." They walked together to the metro. It was the first time in months that Elsa sat on a train seat instead of concrete. She didn't look around, didn't speak. But inside her chest, something shifted. Not quite hope, but something close to it. The shelter in Södermalm was not glamorous, but it was warm. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, and the air smelled of old fabric and disinfectant. Elsa followed Alva through the narrow hallway, past women of all ages, some asleep, some whispering, some staring at nothing. Her assigned bed was in a shared room with 5 other women. A pale blue curtain hung around each bed for a thin illusion of privacy. Elsa sat on the edge of the mattress, hands on her knees, unsure whether to relax or flee. Alva stood in the doorway. "They'll ask a few questions in the morning. If you stay longer, you'll need to register." Elsa gave a tiny nod. Alva hesitated, then stepped back. "I'll come by tomorrow. Around 9. "All right," Elsa murmured, eyes still fixed on the blanket. Alva left. As her footsteps faded, Elsa lay down and curled into herself. The mattress was thin but dry. The pillow smelled faintly of lavender soap. Still, sleep didn't come. The woman in the bed opposite snored gently, and someone's mobile phone vibrated every few minutes with soft chimes. Elsa's mind returned to her mother. She remembered being 10 years old, reading Astrid Lindgren by torchlight. Her mother would peek in, shake her head, and smile. "You'll ruin your eyes, I'll skling." But she never stopped her. When did that kindness vanish? She hadn't seen her mother since that day on Drottninggatan. She'd wanted to reach out so many times. But every time she considered it, a voice inside whispered, "She chose him, not you." And that hurt more than the cold ever had. The next morning, Alva returned with 2 takeaway coffees and a paper bag of Cannelbuller. Elsa accepted them without comment, but her eyes softened. They sat together at a table in the shelter's modest lounge. "I want to help properly," Alva said. "But it means answering questions." Elsa sighed. "I've answered too many questions. Nothing ever changes." "Then let's try different ones," Alva replied gently. "Like, what do you need right now?" Elsa paused, thrown off. "Somewhere safe."
All right.
"I'll focus on that first." The simplicity of the exchange startled Elsa. She had expected forms, demands, lectures.
Not this.
Alva worked fast. She called contacts at transitional housing programs and found a women-only facility that offered a 3-week stay with optional mental health support. It was in Sundbyberg, quieter, away from the center. Elsa agreed to go, mostly because she had nowhere else. By the next day, they were on the move again. The Sundbyberg facility was calmer. Fewer people. A community kitchen. Shared chores. Elsa received a small room with a window that looked onto a frozen football pitch. She spent the first evening sitting on the windowsill, staring out at the snow-covered goalposts. Still, something felt strange. A woman named Lena, one of the staff members, recognized Elsa's surname when she signed in. She asked gently, "Are you related to Magnus Sjoberg?" Elsa froze. "Yes," she said finally. "He's my stepfather." Lena gave a slight nod and said no more. But her expression changed, and Elsa noticed it. That night, Elsa couldn't sleep again. She realized for the first time that Magnus might be known, maybe even respected. He worked in finance, but he had connections. He spoke at fundraisers, donated to charities. Elsa sat in the dark with her notebook, hands trembling. She wrote one line. "How can a man be both loved and cruel?" The next morning, she handed the notebook to Alva without explanation. Alva read the line, then closed the cover. "We'll take it 1 page at a time." Elsa nodded, and for the first time in months, her chest loosened enough to let her breathe deeply. But neither of them knew then that Magnus' name would soon come up in a very public way. And with it, a storm that would test both of them far beyond shelter walls. Alva had always kept her professional and personal lives separate. She believed in boundaries, confidentiality, and quiet progress. But when Elsa's notebook began filling with pages, short lines, fragmented memories, small drawings, Alva realized that the line between work and care had already been crossed. Every Wednesday morning, they met in the small common room near the kitchen in Sundbyberg. Elsa would bring her notebook, and Alva would bring coffee. Some days, Elsa wrote nothing. On others, she wrote several pages, but would let Alva read only one. The stories painted a troubling picture: late-night shouting, a door slammed too hard, a bruise explained away by clumsiness. Elsa never used the word abuse, but the weight of it hung between the lines. Alva read everything carefully, never reacting too strongly. "Thank you for letting me see this," she would say each time. Then came the story that changed everything. It was a half-page note, written in slightly shaky handwriting. "He called me disgusting. Said no one would believe me. Said I was a liar like my mother. Then he locked the door." Alva's hands trembled slightly as she folded the notebook shut. "Elsa," she said slowly, "I think this is something the police should see." Elsa's eyes darkened.
No.
Alva tried to remain calm. "You don't have to decide now. But if you ever want to, I'll be with you. Every step." Elsa stood up, suddenly distant. "You don't understand. He's not just anyone. People know him. He has friends in every office." Alva's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not afraid of his friends." Elsa gave her a long look. "Maybe you should be." Later that day, Alva did something she rarely allowed herself. She searched Magnus Sjoberg online. The results were polished. Headshots from gala events, speeches on economic ethics, donations to youth programs. Not a single negative article. Not even a whisper. It unsettled her. She closed the laptop and went for a walk in the cold. The snow was falling again, soft and silent. Somewhere behind her, Church bells marked the hour. She looked up at the gray sky and wondered how many stories like Elsa's went unheard. The following week, everything changed. A local journalist named Johan Ekstrom published an exposé in Dagens Nyheter about an unnamed financial figure suspected of historic domestic misconduct. The article mentioned a source who had remained anonymous but claimed years of emotional and physical harm by a well-known businessman. The details were vague but not vague enough. Alva read the article in her office, her heart thudding in her chest. She called Elsa at once. No answer. She took the next train to Sundbyberg and found the facility in chaos. Staff were whispering. Phones were ringing. A TV in the common room played the news on low volume, showing blurred photos of an expensive home in Ostermalm. Elsa was in her room, sitting on the floor, her notebook clutched in both hands. Alva knelt beside her. Did you speak to them? Elsa nodded slowly. Anonymously. I didn't think they'd run it. Are you all right? Elsa let out a dry laugh. I don't know. There was a long silence. Then she whispered, He'll know it was me. Alva reached for her hand. Let him know. Let him be afraid, for once. Elsa didn't reply, but her grip tightened. That night, as Stockholm settled under another blanket of snow, two people sat in silence, side by side, one wondering how to protect the other, and one wondering if protection was even possible. The next morning, Elsa woke to the sound of knocks on the front door downstairs. It was barely 7. Pale morning light crept through the blinds. Outside, the frost on the windows shimmered like delicate crystal. Inside, everything felt brittle. She remained still, listening. Voices murmured below. One of the staff members, Lena, climbed the stairs with hurried steps and tapped gently on Elsa's door. There are 2 police officers downstairs, she said quietly. They're asking for you. Elsa froze. Why? They said it's not an arrest. They just want to talk. Alva arrived less than 10 minutes later, breathless, and wearing her coat halfway off. Her eyes met Elsa's as she stepped into the corridor. You don't have to say anything you're not ready to say. Elsa nodded, swallowing hard. The officers, a woman named Inspector Ron and a man called Jacobson, sat with them in the staff meeting room. The table was scattered with brochures and sugar packets. It felt surreal. We believe you might have information that supports an ongoing investigation, Ron said calmly. You've not been named, but we take all leads seriously. Elsa's fingers tightened around her sleeves. Inspector Ron continued. Someone came forward. Another woman. She read the article in Dagens Nyheter and contacted us yesterday evening. Elsa looked up sharply. Alva leaned in. What does that mean? It means, said Ron, you're not alone anymore. The words were so simple, yet they struck something deep inside Elsa. For years, she had felt like the only one, the only girl, the only child, the only voice in a locked house. Now, someone else was speaking. They asked Elsa if she would consider making an official statement. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked out to the garden behind the facility and stood by the frozen fountain. Snow clung to the iron rim. A pigeon pecked hopelessly at the ice. Alva joined her minutes later. I don't know if I can go through it again, Elsa whispered. The questions. The looks. You already survived the worst part, Alva said. Telling your truth is power. But it's your choice. Always. Elsa closed her eyes. The following week, she gave her statement. Quietly.
Carefully.
With Alva beside her every minute. It took hours. She spoke of her mother's silence, her stepfather's cruelty, the bruises she had once covered with makeup. She spoke of how his words had dug deeper than fists ever could. And when she finished, Inspector Ron said, You were brave to come forward. Elsa didn't feel brave. She felt exhausted. But for the first time, she also felt seen. Days passed. The article had caused ripples across Stockholm's polished elite. Speculation ran wild. The financial firm where Magnus worked issued a bland statement of denial. But pressure was building. Elsa received an anonymous letter. It arrived in an unmarked envelope, folded once, with clean handwriting. You think you're clever, but you've always been weak. We both know the truth. Alva reported it to the police immediately. They opened a file. Increased security. But Elsa knew. It was him. He hadn't signed it, but he didn't need to. She knew the tone. The way he always used truth like a weapon. That night, Elsa didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, staring at the letter, then at her notebook. Her fingers hovered over the pen. Then, without a word, she began to write. Not about fear. Not about survival. She wrote a name. His name. And under it the word, enough. Magnus Sjoberg had always known how to play the public. He wore charm like a tailored coat, impeccably fitted, with just enough warmth to appear genuine. But now, the seams were beginning to unravel. The media storm was growing louder. Though no official names had been released, whispers surged across Stockholm's business and legal circles. Investors were uneasy. Interviews were cancelled. A glossy interview in Svenska Dagbladet was pulled at the last minute. Something had shifted. Alva watched it all from a cautious distance. She didn't trust the headlines. Public opinion could turn like the wind off Lake Mälaren. Today's sympathy could be tomorrow's doubt. And Elsa, quiet as ever, carried the weight of both. At the clinic, life tried to continue as normal. Elsa took her medication. She went to therapy. She even started attending a creative writing group. But Alva noticed the way she always sat with her back to the wall, how she flinched at loud voices, how her fingers tensed whenever someone knocked unexpectedly. The letter had changed something in her. One afternoon, Alva found Elsa in the lounge, staring at the television. A news anchor was speaking over footage of Magnus entering a courthouse, flanked by 2 lawyers. The caption read, Sjoberg questioned over misconduct allegations. They finally brought him in, Elsa said, her voice flat. Only for questioning, Alva replied. No formal charges yet. Elsa turned to her. Do you think they'll arrest him? Alva chose her words carefully. If enough people speak out, it becomes harder to ignore. Elsa gave a small, bitter smile. But people like him, they always find a way out. That evening, another letter arrived. But this time, it wasn't threatening. It came from a woman named Carolina. She had read the article. She had recognized the signs. Her letter was long, handwritten, and deeply personal. When I was 17, I lived in that house too, she wrote. I thought I was the only one. Alva and Elsa read it together, sentence by sentence. Carolina described the same house, the same controlling language, even the same bruises in the same places. She hadn't known Elsa. She had left before Magnus married Elsa's mother. But the pattern was unmistakable. Elsa was silent for a long time. Then she said, Can I meet her? The meeting was arranged for the following week. They chose a cafe near Gamla Stan, where no one would recognize them, surrounded by tourists and the sound of cobblestones underfoot. Carolina was older than Elsa had imagined, mid-30s, with streaks of silver in her blonde hair. But her eyes held the same quiet caution. They barely touched their coffee. The words flowed, without prompting. Pain, memory, shame. But also recognition. And something close to relief. I thought it was just me, Carolina said. Elsa nodded. So did I. That night, as they parted outside the cafe, Carolina turned back and said, You started this. Without your voice, I'd have never spoken. Elsa didn't know what to say. Back in her room, she looked out the window toward the snowy rooftops of Sundbyberg. A city full of lights and secrets. Somewhere out there, Magnus Sjoberg was watching everything fall apart. She knew he would fight. He always fought. But this time, he was not alone in the ring. She was not alone either. The ice had begun to crack. By the time February settled in, Stockholm felt suspended in gray. The snow no longer looked soft or gentle. It was tired, like the city itself. Elsa sat by the frosted window of the clinic's library, watching ice melt in slow, dripping streaks down the pane. Alva entered quietly and placed a slim file on the table. It's official, she said. The prosecutor is opening a case. They're charging Magnus. Elsa looked up, eyes wide. On what grounds? Multiple accounts. psychological abuse, coercive control. At least 2 other women besides Carolina have come forward now. Elsa stared at the file. The name, Schoberg, Magnus, sat typed at the top like a scar pressed into the page. The following day, the press descended with sharper teeth. Magnus' name had been made public. News outlets spun it as a fall from grace, once the golden man of Swedish finance, now facing accusations that would stain his name forever. But even with the shift in tide, Elsa felt no triumph. She felt exposed. Strangers debated her pain in comment sections. Headlines speculated on her mental health, her motives, her truth. Online trolls accused her of revenge, attention-seeking, even fabrication. Alva had warned her this might happen. But no warning could prepare someone for the cold intimacy of public scrutiny. "I didn't ask to be a symbol," Elsa muttered one evening. "I just wanted it to stop." Alva nodded. "And you've taken the first step to make sure it never happens again." Later that week, Elsa received another letter. But this one wasn't handwritten or anonymous. It arrived on official paper from Magnus' lawyers. A request for mediation. He wanted to settle. Quietly. No trial. No courtroom. Elsa read the offer once. Then again. A lump formed in her throat. The amount they proposed was large enough to start a new life. A new city. A clean break. But that wasn't what Elsa wanted. She looked at Alva across the small therapy room. "If I say yes, it disappears. Everything I fought for, everything Carolina and the others came forward for, it becomes nothing." Alva nodded gently. "It's your choice. But remember, silence is what allowed him to survive for so long." Elsa picked up the paper. Her hands were shaking. But she tore the letter in half, then in quarters, and dropped it into the bin. The next morning, she asked to speak to Inspector On. "I'll testify," she said simply. "Whatever it takes." Word spread quickly. The state would move forward with a full trial. Witnesses were being prepared. Elsa's testimony would be central. Still, the fear crept in like winter fog. Elsa began having nightmares again. Echoes of footsteps, locked doors, the sound of her stepfather's voice whispering cruel things in her ear. But this time, when she woke gasping for air, she wasn't alone. Alva was there. And so was something else. Strength. Elsa didn't feel strong every day. Some mornings, she barely made it out of bed. But strength didn't mean the absence of fear. It meant moving forward in spite of it. Each session with the prosecutor was difficult. Each memory sharpened, like glass. But as Elsa spoke, the silence that had ruled her life for so long began to lose its power. He had a name. He had a face. And now, so did she. The Stockholm District Court sat like a monolith against the gray sky, its stone facade etched with decades of justice and silence. On the morning of the trial, the street outside was lined with cameras, microphones, and strangers wearing scarves pulled up against the cold, hoping to glimpse the man at the center of the scandal. But today, all eyes would turn to Elsa. She stood in the corridor outside the courtroom, flanked by Alva on one side and the prosecutor, Lena Nystrom, on the other. Her hands were trembling despite the gloves. Her throat felt tight, but her spine held steady. "Just speak the truth," Lena said gently. "That's all you need to do." The courtroom was quiet when Elsa stepped in. Her boots echoed against the polished floor. Magnus sat to the left, behind his lawyers, impeccably dressed, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at her. Not once. But she saw his fingers twitch. The first day was procedural. Names. Charges. The defense called it a smear campaign. They claimed Elsa's memories were manipulated, born from suggestion and trauma, not fact. Elsa remained silent. She watched the courtroom the way she once watched the hallway outside her bedroom door, alert, cautious, ready. On the second day, she took the stand. There was no shield. No screen. She had refused both. "I want him to see me," she had told Alva. And he did. Elsa told them everything. The isolation. The control. The way Magnus turned her mother against her, made her question her own worth, her own memory. She described the manipulation, the constant surveillance, the moments of psychological terror dressed as fatherly concern. She spoke of the letter, the fear, the attempt to erase her with kindness and threats, both tied in the same ribbon. Her voice never cracked. Not once. But her hands gripped the edge of the witness box until her knuckles turned white. Magnus' lawyers tried to twist her words. They suggested she was unstable, fragile, seeking vengeance. But Elsa held steady. "I'm not here to be believed by everyone," she said calmly. "I'm here to say what happened. Because silence is how this continues. And I won't carry his silence anymore." When Carolina testified the next day, the courtroom fell into a hush. Her story mirrored Elsa's in haunting ways. The same patterns, the same tone. A different time, a different girl, but the same man behind the curtain. By the third witness, even the press had changed their tone. Elsa read a headline that morning on her way to court. "More than one voice. The case against Magnus Sjoberg gathers weight." Outside the courtroom, women began leaving small letters on the courthouse steps. Anonymous stories, hidden griefs, pieces of paper that said, "Me too," in Swedish, English, and beyond. The tide had turned. But inside the courtroom, the battle was not yet over. On the fourth day, Magnus finally spoke. He denied everything, claimed affection, misunderstanding. He even wept once, in rehearsed silence. But Elsa watched the way his eyes never met hers. When it was over, the judge announced the trial would reconvene the following week for closing statements. The verdict would follow shortly after. As Elsa stepped out into the bitter Stockholm air, flurries began to fall. For the first time in years, she tilted her face toward the snow and let it touch her skin. She didn't know what the judge would decide. But she had spoken, and that in itself was power. The courtroom was still. The long wait had stretched every nerve taut. Elsa sat beside Alva and Lena, the weight of days pressed deep into her bones. The judge entered, a woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to pierce through walls. She cleared her throat and began reading. Magnus Sjoberg was found guilty of psychological abuse and coercive control against Elsa and two other women. The sentence included a significant prison term and mandatory rehabilitation programs. A murmur rippled through the room. Elsa's heart pounded, not from fear, but from relief. Outside, the winter sun cast long shadows across the city's streets. The snow had stopped. The air was sharp and clean. As Elsa stepped out of the courthouse, she felt the eyes of the crowd on her, not as a victim, but as a survivor. The letters left at the steps had multiplied, filling a small box with stories from women and men who found courage because of her. Alva hugged her tightly. "You did it," she whispered. Elsa closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future not ruled by fear. The next weeks brought a quiet change. Magnus appealed, but his influence waned. Elsa began volunteering at a support center for survivors of abuse in Stockholm. She found purpose in helping others speak their truths. Carolina became her closest ally. Together, they spoke at gatherings, urging society to recognize the invisible scars of coercive control. One evening, Elsa walked along the frozen shores of Lake Mälaren. The city lights reflected in the icy water, shimmering with a fragile beauty. She smiled softly to herself. The darkness had been long and deep, but beneath it, seeds of light had taken root. Spring crept slowly into Stockholm, melting away the harshness of winter. The days grew longer, and with them, Elsa felt a new warmth growing inside her. She sat in a small cafe in Södermalm, the scent of fresh bread and coffee filling the air. Across from her, Carolina smiled, her eyes bright with hope. "We've come a long way," Carolina said quietly. Elsa nodded. "It's still hard. Sometimes I feel the weight of everything. But it's different now. I'm not alone." Together, they planned new projects to raise awareness about abuse and mental health. They spoke on panels, wrote articles, and met with policymakers. Elsa found her voice had grown stronger, not just for herself, but for others who still struggled in silence. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the city's rooftops, Elsa walked through the park near her childhood home. The trees were budding, and birds sang songs of renewal. She stopped by a small bench and sat, looking out over the city she once feared. In that moment, Elsa felt a quiet peace. She had survived the darkest chapters of her life. And now, she was writing new ones filled with light, courage, and the unbreakable hope of a dawn over Stockholm.